welcome to the second iteration of the Big Wet Season forecast for season 2024-25. I'm your host Josh from CyclonesOZ, and today we're going to be breaking down all things rainfall, thunderstorms, cyclones and bushfires for the wet season forecast of 2024-25. This is a complex forecast update. We've made some pretty big refinements, especially to the rainfall and the cyclone forecast, so it's going to be a long video. Make sure you do stick around to the end for all relevant information. If you are brand new to the channel as well, I kindly ask you to subscribe, especially if you do find the information informative or helpful in any way. Subscribing is the best way to support this channel. This information is valid as of October 1st, 2024. The video was recorded on September 30th, 2024. Let's get straight into it. As mentioned, it's a big one. We're going to start off with the rainfall forecast. We're going to move into a thunderstorm forecast for tropical locations and subtropical locations. We'll take a look at a cyclone outlook as well. We're also going to take a look at some wildcard forecasts and interesting anomalies that I have found in presenting the forecast anomalies. And you'll also see some photos that I've taken around the beautiful West Australian state. We're going to kick things off now with the rainfall forecast. Our key points are as follows. Models and recent rainfall data has shifted to support elevated rainfall, at least in the first half of the monsoon season across the east and the west coast. The north coast does remain a little bit more of a wild card at this time. Increased thunderstorm events and the potential for thunderstorm outbreaks look to substantially add to rainfall totals for select locations, and it remains difficult to say how much rainfall will fall across locations in central and northern Australia, although at this time it looks to be at least slightly above average for the first part of the wet season. And this is our rainfall forecast map here. It's had a major refinement since last forecast, especially over in the west, where we have raised all of the rainfall at least slightly. In fact, now we're expecting above average rainfall across central parts of Western Australia in the wake of some very wet weather that they have had in the past 2 weeks. We do have a little pocket of slightly below average weather, rainfall around Kununurra and Wyndham, that sort of area. However, that is a little bit more of a wild card forecast this time. Slightly above average across the northern parts of the Northern Territory, including Darwin, and then across over towards Kakadu. We've also got slightly above average rainfall accumulations expected along the central Queensland coast and up in towards far north Queensland, and slightly above rainfall is expected into the southeast corner of Queensland and the northeastern parts of New South Wales, with more thunderstorm events and low pressure systems expected to make some significant rainfall contributions down there. We're also expecting significantly above average rainfall across parts of the Cape York Peninsula, extending down into far north Queensland along the Cassowary coast and into the Daintree rainforest as well, and substantially higher rainfall accumulations are also expected in the northeast of New South Wales and the southeast of Queensland around Mount Tamborine and the scenic rim there. And that's also been supported by recent rainfall events where Lismore has just copped a drenching of 300 millimeters at the time of recording this video. And this is a map of rainfall onsets, and by definition the northern rainfall onset occurs when more than 50 millimeters falls after September 1st in any given wet season, and you can already see that that has occurred, as highlighted in the pink areas across parts of Western Australia and the Northern Territory, and also parts of far north Queensland and southeastern Queensland in the wake of thunderstorms over there. The West Australian and the Northern Territory one is a little bit of an anomaly. That's some of the wettest rainfall that they have had in September on record from what has already fallen. However, that has swung the scales in favour for some earlier than expected onsets across much of Western Australia. Over east, the map hasn't changed much. We are still expecting those early rainfall onsets there. It becomes more average as you get further into Central Australia, with limited reliable data across parts of Western Australia and the Northern Territory, and then a later than usual northern rainfall onset is expected into the Gascoyne and parts of the Pilbara. For Western Australia, again, that does remain a little bit of a wildcard forecast. And then on the bottom side of your screen, you can see when exactly we're expecting the rainfall onset to occur for major population locations across parts of Northern Australia. And you can already see some dates for Darwin and Katherine, especially where the northern rainfall onset has occurred, September 22nd and 23rd for those locations there, and then for other locations as well, such as into Western Australia and far north Queensland. And we'll just spend a hot 20 seconds on this more simplified and less cluttered map. This is where the recent rainfall has already occurred. We were talking more than 50 millimeters in the past month or so to start the northern rainfall onset, which has occurred across parts of Western Australia and the Northern Territory, and as mentioned, into far north Queensland and southeastern Queensland. Let's break this down state by state. You can see Western Australia has received a pretty big up in terms of rainfall, just considering how much has already fallen across parts of tropical Western Australia. That is still to say that they're expecting a couple of dry months ahead of them. But once we get towards January and February, I'm expecting some good rainfall over there. Northern Territory is around average, maybe slightly above, slightly below. It's going to bounce around on the month. It's a really hard forecast to make, but I do expect it to be pretty close to the average across much of the Northern Territory, drier as you get into the interior and wetter as you get closer to the coast. Queensland, it's slightly above average. It will be a wet December and January by the looks of things. The northern rainfall onset is going to come in, and it's going to come in quick for the far north and also parts of the central coast with increased cyclone numbers possible there. More on that later on in the video, but more or less around average, and it will likely go towards average or maybe even slightly below average in the later parts of the wet season as an El Nino develops. Also more on that later on in this update. And it's important that we understand what's driving this. We can see sea surface temperatures anomalies a solid 0.8 to 1 degree Celsius above average across Western Australia, the Northern Territory and Queensland, trending warmer towards Queensland. In fact, tropical cyclone numbers, we will break this down in greater detail in just a few minutes. They're expected to be below average over in Western Australia, hence why I'm not 100% sold on above average rainfall there. Around average for the Northern Territory and above average for Queensland, hence the higher rainfall, especially in the tropical zones. And in terms of conducive climatic and thermodynamic conditions that can promote thunderstorm and low pressure activity across these states, it's either slightly above to much above across the north and the northeast, and then around average as you get further west and closer to the interior. Interesting stuff, and if it's gone over your head, here is a summary on what we are expecting. Rainfall accumulations are forecast to be above average for much of northern Australia, especially for Queensland, parts of semi-tropical New South Wales and parts of the Northern Territory. Rainfall will also be at times higher than average, especially into the middle parts of the wet season for West Australia and the Northern Territory, but for much of the wet season it will be closer to average, and especially towards the later parts of the wet season up there. Interior Australia and parts of WA are still a hard sell forecast. I haven't been able to make my mind up in the last month over there, and with high levels of uncertainty surrounding the forecast, and also given the fact that they receive typically low rainfall accumulation, so it only takes 1 or 2 thunderstorms or a tropical cyclone to blow through and swing the scales in terms of the favour for the wet year or for a dry year over there. So again, just not sure over there. However, much earlier rainfall onsets are expected across the east of the nation, with earlier onsets for up to 70% of tropical Australia as forecast by the Bureau of Meteorology. I think that's just a little bit bullish given the current circumstances, but it's a number that I am going to run with, and it is also a number that is totally plausible. We will keep an eye on things, especially with how rainfall onsets have occurred for as much as 10% of the nation, and it's not even October at the time of me recording this video. Interesting stuff indeed. Now for my Queensland and New South Wales viewers, thunderstorms, and for those of you interested, severe thunderstorms. Here are our key points. Favourable climatic conditions, warm sea surface temperatures, warm temperatures in general, and high humidity look to make convective thunderstorms such as Hector over the Northern Territory and parts of sea breeze thunderstorms over WA and Queensland more active this year. We're also looking at increased chances of severe storm outbreaks across New South Wales and Queensland from frontal events, especially throughout October and into November. We're already starting to see some of them fire up on the forecast models, and thunderstorms from rainfall events across WA look to be or have been prevalent across the early season. However, likely going to have an end to that, at least for the coming couple of months, but it has swung thunderstorms in favour of an active year for Western Australia already, and the wet season hasn't technically begun for some of those locations. And here's a look at our updated map here. You can see just in conjunction with current climatic trends, we are looking at slightly above average thunderstorm conditions expected across parts of Queensland, much of the Northern Territory and parts of Western Australia as well. We've also got a little belt over in the wheat belt. Again, I'm not 100% sure on that yet, but just given the circumstances of frontal conditions still blowing through the southwest corner, I'm still expecting above average days there, but that's a very small corner of Australia. Over east, we are looking at above average thunderstorm chances, but not only that, above average severe thunderstorm chances, and the severe thunderstorms there between October and January can get gnarly. Giant hailstones, destructive winds, the chance of tornadoes as well look to be likely this year, in fact more than any other year. And if I was going to compare this to a previous thunderstorm season, it would be last year, the 23 to 24 season. That was a nuts season, and it looks to happen all over again for parts of eastern Australia. However, I think it will keep a little bit further away from major population centres on the coast. Fingers crossed. Much above average thunderstorm days expected across parts of the Northern Territory and Western Australia, as I said, in line with convective events expected up there. And just briefly, state by state, Western Australia more or less average. It's going to be below average in some places and above in other places, but you can call it an average mix all round. around. Northern Territory I'm expecting to be slightly above average, especially as you get closer to the coast. And then subtropical Queensland and New South Wales, elevated severe storm chances to begin with. And then towards the end of the wet season, it's a little bit more uncertain. The thunderstorm chances will drop off, but with rainfall events through March and April, we'll likely see normal numbers of thunderstorm days across there. Again, we're going to have to revisit this at a later date. And let's break it down on the climate driver and influencer chart here. In terms of fronts and troughs expected to be those thunderstorm makers across Queensland, West Australia and New South Wales, it's all slightly above average to much above average there, with at least 30% more systems expected to create those thunderstorms. And like I said, we're already seeing them on the forecast models now. In terms of rainfall / cyclone events, it's below for Western Australia, but in the Northern Territory, Queensland and New South Wales, it is slightly above average there. Same story for climatic and thermodynamic conditions. It's basically above average over in the east and below average or closer to average over in the west and the north, which means thunderstorms there will have a little bit of a harder time firing up and will be likely shorter lived. And let's quickly wrap that up. Climatic trends lately have supported more thunderstorm chances and thunderstorm days in recent years, and we're expecting to see that presented in this year, unlike pretty much any other year, where Queensland and New South Wales are expected to have another pretty significant severe storm season. We will be watching that very closely on this channel. Increased rainfall and more favourable conditions for thunderstorms and sea breeze convective storms will be more prevalent across the Northern Territory and parts of Queensland as well. And Western Australia just remains our hard sell place. It does, especially as you get inland. There's still good chances of thunderstorms firing up there, but I'm going to have to say average. In some places it'll be above average, other places it'll be below average. We just don't know for sure at this time. Unfortunately, there's just so much uncertainty in the forecast. And now for the part I know a lot of you have been waiting for, the tropical cyclone forecast. We've got a lot to get through here, so buckle up. This is going to be a long segment. Let's start off with our key point. With ENSO now swinging towards a La Nina phase, which looks to be bringing those above average sea surface temperatures across the north and the east, it looks to be a bumper cyclone season for Queensland. However, in saying that, with extremely high moisture values and elevated wind shear in the atmosphere, it's going to be a hard time for cyclones to really wrap themselves up properly. And as such, we're not expecting significant cyclone activity, at least for the first part of the season. We could see a strong one, as with every season, but I reckon they're going to be most likely on the weaker side of things, Category 1, Category 2, and messy tropical lows, which do also present substantial problems for Queensland. We can't just be erasing those from our thoughts. West Australia and the Northern Territory, again, a difficult forecast. However, it looks like cyclones there are going to remain out to sea and not too likely to affect land. West Australia, we always get a strong tropical cyclone skim across the West Australian coast pretty much every single year. It's going to happen again this year. I can pretty much guarantee that, 90% chance at least. It's just a matter of if it goes for land or if it skims across the northwest coast and heads further out to sea. It's more likely to head further out to sea this year compared to other years. And here is our ENSO and IOD dials. You can see ENSO swinging towards La Nina, and in fact we're nearly at those La Nina thresholds now, with a Nino 3.4 sea surface temperature anomaly down to negative 0.7 degrees Celsius. Negative 0.8 is what constitutes a La Nina. So a weak La Nina is possible sometime later in October or November, but it will be short-lived, and we'll likely see a pretty rapid shift towards El Nino later on in the wet season, March and April, and a full-blown El Nino is likely to develop sometime in 2025. That is still looking very far into the future, but that's exactly what I'm expecting at this time. In terms of the IOD, it's more or less neutral. We're not expecting the IOD to have a big role in terms of cyclone activity this year. The IOD typically does impact the West Australian basin more so than any other basin. We're expecting it to keep tropical cyclones a little bit further out to sea this wet season. And here is our overcomplicated and very messy map of tropical cyclone numbers. You can see basin by basin, or sub-basin by sub-basin I should say. Over in Western Australia, you're expecting between 2 and 3 tropical cyclones this year. Could be below that, could be above it. I'm pretty happy with that number, and that is down from the long-term average of 3 to 5. Over in the Northern Territory, I'm really not expecting much in the way of activity up there. Between 0 and 2 tropical cyclones, so the long-term average between 1 and 4. We've also got that little hotspot over in the far west of Western Australia where tropical cyclones typically form. I'm not expecting them to be too close to the WA coast this year. And over in Queensland, where the majority of the people interested in all of these cyclone stuff live, we're expecting an elevated 2 to 5 tropical cyclones this year, with a hotspot being now along along the Queensland coastline up in towards the far north. The good news is that they're expected to be weaker systems. Tropical lows, category 1s, category 2s, maybe a category 3 or 4 thrown in there. I reckon the chance for category 4 or 5 going for the Queensland coast is really low this tropical cyclone season. Again, we do have to look at it every single year, and it only takes one system to cause a lot of damage. But if I'm going to say a year is unlikely to get a category 5, it will definitely be this year. I'm not expecting strong tropical cyclones in the Coral Sea. And that brings our number to 5 to 10 tropical cyclones, which is slightly below the long-term average of 11, with a lot of messy systems and a lot of weak systems expected. Don't be fooled, they can cause some really significant damage in terms of rainfall and storm surge though, so we still need to be vigilant between the months of October through to May. Cyclone numbers, there's a pretty all-round bias towards the early season here. Over in Queensland, you do get a bit of a bump in the mid-season. We are expecting above average cyclone numbers there, but with the development of an El Nino expected later on or early on into 2025, sometime around March or April, where we will start to see those scales swung violently towards El Nino, we're likely to see a reduction in tropical cyclone chances, especially for Queensland, hence that jump off a cliff sometime in February or March, where rainfall is expected to drop off substantially. But yeah, we are expecting a pretty heavy start to cyclone season, more so than we've had in the last 10 years or so. I reckon it's going to be a pretty busy start, and it will die off as the season goes on. Here is what's driving it. Sea-surface temperature anomalies, like we've said in the rainfall forecast, they're above average across WA, the Northern Territory and Queensland. Atmospheric favourability, however, remains below average. With increased thunderstorm chances, we have increased wind shear in the atmosphere, and as such, we're not looking at as favourable seasons compared to previous ones in terms of the atmosphere. Wind shear is looking like it's going to get a lot of cyclones this year and prevent them from forming. In terms of tropical waves and available energy for systems, above average over in Queensland, average in the Northern Territory, and substantially below average over in Western Australia. I'm expecting all the energy over in Western Australia and over parts of the north to remain either inland or well offshore, and as such, we're expecting reduced tropical cyclone chances across the west and the north, and elevated cyclone chances for the coast over in the east. Again, we will have to play this month by month and keep an eye on things. The forecasts can change, but this is based off the latest information that we have from a whole range of forecast models. So this is as reliable as you're going to get. And let's summarise this. As with all seasons, cyclones are possible throughout pretty much any month of the year. They're most likely between October and April. However, this year, especially for areas over in the west and the north, but also over in the east, above average activity is forecast in the first 3 months of the season until February. An earlier than usual start is also expected for eastern Australia. We typically don't get cyclones until about November or December over there, but I would not be surprised if something fired up late October or early November. In fact, some of the really long-range models already have rumbles of activity in the Coral Sea later on into October. Don't be fooled, however, it is a weak tropical cyclone and nothing worth talking about at this time. We will keep a very close eye on things. The Coral Sea is expecting average activity throughout or above average activity rather, throughout the season, with weaker cyclones and tropical lows most likely this year as opposed to strong systems. That is not to say, and I have to keep reinforcing this, that they aren't going to be damaging. A tropical low, I mean, we saw what happened with Cyclone Jasper, the wettest cyclone on record, and it made landfall as a category 1, so we cannot be taking those weak systems as if they're nothing. They can still be pretty significant in terms of rainfall. It's just the wind threat that we don't have to really worry about with those systems. And yeah, that basically does it for the big wet forecast of season 24-25, the second iteration of it, a refined version of the first one. You guys really love that video, so thank you so much for the support on that. If you've got any questions or comments regarding this forecast as well, then please do leave them in the comment section down below, and I will get back to as many people as I can. Now, for questions about the information from this, I've compiled data of about 6 forecast models here, so it's a complete and comprehensive mix. I've pulled data from the Bureau of Meteorology, from a website called Tropical Tidbits, 2 fantastic websites for storm information. So again, the data here is as reliable as you are going to get, but that's not to say things won't change. There's going to be some pretty big discrepancies between this forecast and what's going to happen this wet season. That's just how forecasts go, and especially with an El Nino developing or possible to develop early on next year, I reckon from February onwards we're going to need to revisit the forecast and do another one and see what's expected there, because from February onwards there's a big discrepancy between what is expected. But yeah, that is all that I have time for today. Thank you so much for watching the video. It's a great one indeed. I've put a lot of effort into this one, and I have tried to make it as accurate as possible. For information on how to prepare for a tropical cyclone and severe thunderstorms, you can check out the Bureau of Meteorology's website. They have the most accurate and reliable information there. Also, Also, getting yourself onto the SES website as well for your relevant state. That's a fantastic idea. They have some great information. But your shire office and local police station, if you have concerns, you can always give them a call, and they'll also have some good information for you on how to prepare your property, your home, and your loved ones. They will have information on how to get everything ready for powerful systems and severe thunderstorms over there. But yeah, that is all from me today. Special shout out to the channel sponsors. The names are on screen right now. I could not run this show without them, so a special shout out to all of the names now. That is all from me today, and I'll catch you all in the next storm. Goodbye.